At exactly 2 in the morning, under the harsh white lights of a nearly empty roadside diner, a single father sat hunched over a chipped wooden table, trying to divide one plate of pancakes into 4 equal pieces, while his 3 sleepy toddlers fought to keep their eyes open. Outside, the world was silent and indifferent. Inside, his entire universe was crumbling quietly. If you believe in kindness and second chances, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Whisper Tales 3. Stories like this remind us that even the darkest nights can lead to the brightest mornings. Rayan Malik never imagined his life would look like this. At 32, he had once managed a small logistics company in Karachi, earning enough to give his wife and newborn triplets a stable home. But life can turn without warning: a failed business deal, mounting debts, and then the illness that took his wife Samira within months, shattered the structure he had built so carefully. Suddenly, he was alone with 3 infants and a mountain of responsibilities that felt heavier than grief itself. That night, he had driven aimlessly after receiving a final notice from his landlord earlier that afternoon. By sunrise, he and the children would have nowhere to go. His savings were gone. His pride was thinner than the worn fabric of his jacket. He had spent the evening applying for jobs on a borrowed laptop at a friend's shop, but rejection emails filled his inbox like quiet reminders of his failures. When the triplets woke up crying from hunger, he drove to the only place still open, the old 24-hour diner near the highway. The morning was beginning to bloom outside, streaks of pale orange stretching across the sky. Inside the diner, the smell of coffee and butter hung heavy in the air. Rayan ordered the cheapest item on the menu and asked for extra plates. His triplets, Ariba, Xavian, and little Mihir, sat in a row, their hair messy, their cheeks round and flushed with sleep. They didn't understand eviction notices or unpaid bills. They only knew their father's tired smile. Rayan carefully sliced the pancakes into tiny portions, pretending he wasn't hungry. He told them it was a special sunrise feast, making airplane sounds as he lifted each bite to their mouths. Ariba giggled, Xavian clapped. Mihir rubbed his eyes and leaned against his father's arm. In that fragile moment, despite everything, Rayan felt rich in the only way that mattered. Across the diner, near the window where the early sunlight filtered in, sat a woman dressed far too elegantly for a roadside cafe at dawn. Her name was Alara Voss, though few in the city didn't recognize it. She was the only daughter of a tech magnate whose company had transformed digital infrastructure across South Asia. Headlines called her a billionaire heiress, but at that moment, she looked less like royalty and more like someone searching for something she couldn't name. Alara had left a high-profile board meeting in frustration the night before. Surrounded by advisors who cared only about numbers and expansion, she felt suffocated by privilege. Her life had been scripted since birth. Elite schools, corporate leadership, carefully curated public appearances. She had everything money could buy, yet something essential felt missing. So she drove, alone, without security, until she found herself at the quiet diner just before sunrise. She noticed Rayan not because he was loud, but because he wasn't. There was something sacred in the way he leaned over that table, as if protecting a treasure invisible to everyone else. She watched him push the last piece of pancake toward Mihir while pretending to sip an empty cup of tea. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, but also the fierce determination beneath it. The waitress, an older woman with gentle eyes, approached Rayan with a folded paper in her hand. It was the bill. Rayan's fingers trembled slightly as he reached into his wallet. A few crumpled notes. Not enough. He swallowed hard and quietly asked if he could pay the rest later. The shame in his voice was almost unbearable. Alara stood before she could second-guess herself. She walked to the counter and settled the bill without a word. But something stopped her from leaving. Paying for breakfast felt small, almost insulting compared to the weight she sensed on that man's shoulders. She turned and approached the table. Rayan looked up, confusion flickering across his face. Alara didn't introduce herself with titles or wealth. She simply asked if she could sit. There was something calm in her presence, something that made Rayan lower his guard despite his instincts. As the sun rose fully, casting golden light across the diner, Rayan found himself sharing pieces of his story, not dramatically, not for pity, but with the quiet honesty of someone who had nothing left to hide. He spoke of his late wife, of sleepless nights with crying infants, of job applications unanswered, of the eviction notice folded in his pocket like a countdown. Alara listened, not as a billionaire, not as an executive, just as a human being. When he finished, there was a long silence. Outside, the city was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled past. Shopkeepers lifted metal shutters. A new day was beginning, indifferent, yet full of possibility. Alara finally spoke, not with sympathy, but with conviction. She told him her foundation had recently launched a startup incubator for small logistics companies. She explained they were searching for leaders who understood resilience, not just profit margins. She asked if he would consider pitching his old business model to her team, not as charity, as opportunity. Ryan stared at her, unsure if exhaustion had made him hallucinate. He had spent months being told no. This was the first yes. But she wasn't finished. She made a call right there, arranging temporary housing through one of her company's community programs. Within hours, Rayan and his children would have a furnished apartment for 6 months, enough time to rebuild without the crushing fear of homelessness. She insisted it was an investment, not a favor. Tears welled in Rayan's eyes, but he fought to stay composed for his children. Ariba reached for Alara's hand with innocent trust. Xavian smiled up at her. Mihir, now fully awake, laughed as sunlight warmed his face. In that instant, something shifted, not just in Rayan's life, but in Alara's heart. For the first time in years, Alara felt connected to something real, not quarterly profits or shareholder applause, but human impact. She realized that her wealth meant nothing if it didn't change lives in tangible ways. And Rayan realized that strength wasn't about never falling. It was about standing back up when someone offered a hand. Months later, Rayan stood in a modest office space with his triplets framed photo on his desk. His revitalized logistics startup had secured its first major contract under the incubator program. He worked tirelessly, but now with hope instead of desperation. Every evening, he returned to an apartment filled with laughter instead of fear. Alara visited occasionally, not as a savior, but as a partner. She watched the triplets grow, their tiny hands once sticky with syrup now clutching crayons and storybooks. And each time she saw them, she remembered that morning in the diner, the moment her carefully constructed world cracked open to let light in. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, and share it with someone who needs to believe in hope again. Your engagement helps stories like this reach more people who might be struggling in silence. And before this story ends, I have one small request. Comment the word hope if you believe one act of kindness can change a life. Because sometimes, at 2 a.m., in an ordinary diner, destiny doesn't arrive with flashing lights or grand speeches. Sometimes it arrives quietly, dressed in exhaustion and innocence, waiting for someone brave enough to notice. And when kindness meets courage, even the heaviest burdens begin to lift with the sunrise.